back, my friends, to the D-Rate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk of WilkWorld.com, and I am so incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to join me for another great episode. Here at the D-Rate the Hate podcast, we're all about bettering the world one attitude at a time. You know, we did not create the hate, but with your help, we can derate the hate. It starts with each of us as an individual. So what have you done today to make your life a better life? What have you done today to make the world a better place? Making your life a better life starts with individual accountability. How we act, how we react, no matter what happens to us, how we react to it makes the difference. Friends, one of the great things about a bad attitude is we as individuals have the power to change it. One great way to do that, share the D-Rate the Hate podcast. Share it with your network of friends. Get them to share it. Subscribe. Leave us ratings and feedback. Always greatly appreciated. And with that, let's go. Friends, the world in which we live can be a very dark place. You see, people are broken, and it's up to each one of us to decide whether we want to be a light to combat that darkness or just let hate and evil overtake us. I'm recording this episode with a heavy heart, the same way I always do when I hear of a tragedy like the one that happened this week in Buffalo, New York. Now, there were several other instances in our country of senseless violence, but this one stands out as just a grotesque event because of the nature of it, the nature of the hatred and the outright disdain that this evil human being had for other people simply because they had different color skin than he did. Now, I've talked on this podcast several times about what leads to these hateful actions, the kind of ignorance that breeds this type of hatred that ends up leading to this type of violence. But it's never easy to try to understand it when it happens. To try to understand how somebody could become such a monster that they would senselessly execute innocent people that they know nothing about. It's sick, it's painful, and it brought to mind for me this week a conversation that I had back in episode 86 with my friend Chris Singleton. Now, if you're not familiar with that episode or who Chris Singleton is, Chris Singleton lost his mother in the Mother Emanuel shooting back in 2015, where another young white supremacist seeking to start a race war went in and shot several black parishioners while they were praying in a church in South Carolina. Very tragic story, and I'm actually going to replay that conversation in this episode because it's a very powerful one, and the message that Chris brings to the table, his love is stronger than hate message, is incredibly important, especially right now with the country reeling from another gut-wrenching event like the one that happened this week at the Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York. Senseless tragedy. But one thing I want to talk about real quick before we get to that conversation is a word that I heard in church the other day, a word that I had not heard before. I understand the concept, and I've understood the concept for a very long time. But the word is eschatology. Now, you may have not heard of that word either. I know I hadn't up until a few days ago. But the concept of it does ring true for me because it's a question that I held and had for a very long time when it came to religion. And that's, why does bad things happen to good people? It's something that is very hard to explain, and if you're not a person of faith, it may be one that's harder to swallow. But the fact is if you believe like I do, we may not see justice in this earthly world, or certainly may not see the kind of justice that we want to see in this earthly world. But if you do believe like I do, everything that we see, all the evil that we see in the world, all the perceived and real injustices that we see in the world will be answered for in the next life, in the afterlife. There will be a reckoning. You see, eschatology is the science of last things. It is the end of history the resurrection of the dead, the final judgment, and the vindication of God's justice. And as my pastor said, I don't care what religion you are, we all have an eschatology. We all have to navigate how evil will be dealt with. Now, friends, I bring this up because we cannot live in a world that is ruled by hate. Because nothing, and I do mean nothing, good comes from hatred. And to hate those who have done us wrong will do nothing but eat us up inside. So as my friend Chris Singleton talks about in this coming conversation, we have to find a way to navigate how that evil will be dealt with. He deals with it through faith, as do I. And that is really the only way I can get, or I can navigate the way evil, like the evil done in Buffalo, New York this week, was done. My friends, do not let hate eat you up inside. Do not become the monster that this young man became. Do not allow that to happen to you. Be the light in a world of darkness. Be the love in a world of evil. Because only you can make that decision for yourself. And it's so important that you make the right decision and not allow hate to eat you up. Because love will always triumph over hate. You just have to make that choice. So with that, I'm going to dive right into this conversation with my friend, Chris Singleton, that I had back in episode 86. Make sure to check out those show notes if you want to get a hold of Chris or find out what he's got going on. He's got so much love to give, so much inspiration to share, and you definitely do not want to miss anything he's got going on. Please, check out this conversation, share this episode, and like I said, be the light in a world of darkness. Be the love when there's a lot of hate to contend with. So grateful to have you here. Here we go. Chris Singleton, so grateful to have you on the D-Rate the Hate podcast, man. I very much appreciate your time.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you having me on for sure.
Chris, your message is so inspiring. Can't remember where I first found out about you, but when I started checking out your site and I saw you wearing this shirt that said "Love is stronger than hate," I'm like, well, I've got to get this guy on the D-Rate the Hate podcast. As soon as I saw that shirt and saw a little bit about you, I was like, I know I want to talk to him. And then I found out a little bit more about how that message started and your story of overcoming adversity and forgiveness. So, Chris, for the D-Rate the Hate listeners, let's talk a little bit about 2015 and kind of the catalyst for your journey to forgiveness and more importantly, what you've been able to do since then. So let's start off and talk about what happened in 2015, the Mother Emanuel Church.
Yeah, well, number one, man, thank you so much for having me on. And the incident of what you're speaking of is June 17, 2015, and it was a racially motivated mass shooting at my church. A guy by the name of Dylan Roof, a self-proclaimed white supremacist, had a mission of starting a race war in the country. That was his mission, and he sought out. He set out to take lives at a church, and that's exactly what he did. I'm thankful that the mission that he was on of creating a race war didn't happen, but I lost my mom in that shooting. Right, I lost my mom. She was 45 years young, single mother of 3, extremely hardworking, and she was shot multiple times while she was praying at my church. And this is what all of this mission that I have. When you talked about the love is stronger than hate T-shirt that I was wearing, and all the stuff that I do now it's because of what happened to me and my family when we lost our mom. Beforehand, I just wanted to be a baseball player, man. I was lucky enough to play baseball for a while, but once I lost my mom, my mission in life definitely changed.
I can imagine. I can't personally imagine what that must have been like going through what you went through, but I can certainly see how an event like that in a person's life can totally change the trajectory of what you're doing. And obviously the mission that you're on is so much better than the mission that Dylan Roof was on June 17th, 2015. I like to talk on this podcast a lot of times and bring to the listeners stories about awesomeness out of adversity, people overcoming adversity in their lives. And you've really taken that to the next level. So I want to thank you for that. Talk about your mother and the lessons that she taught you prior to her passing that gave you the strength to get to where you're at today, Chris.
Yeah, well, number one, man, my mother was a very, very loving person. She was, I joke around saying that she would have struggled in the COVID era because, she always want to give you a hug, kiss you on the cheek kind of person, right? And so she would have struggled with that. But also, man, I saw just the compassion that she had with my father. My father was an alcoholic and struggled really bad with it, unfortunately. And I saw the way that she still loved him, and even through the disease that he had, and going through that, I've learned to love people where they are sometimes, even though we don't want them to be where they are sometimes. But I've learned that from her. I've also learned, my mother grew up in the projects and was an athlete, so she got a full-time track scholarship to run in college, and I got some of those athletic abilities, luckily. But fun fact is that she didn't let me beat her in a race until 7th grade, right? Till I finally could actually win. Nice. But, other than that, man, she was caring. She was compassionate. My father was, struggled with alcoholism, but she loved him where he was, right? She loved him where he was. And I think I've learned to love people where they are, even if we want them to, strive to be better, of course, and be better people, loving them where they are. And I think that's perfect in what you're trying to do and what I'm trying to do. Sometimes our family members, right, they may still be thinking hateful things, and, it may take slowly but surely pushing them along the right path for them to see what we see and the way that we see. But she also was a kind of mom that wouldn't let me talk slang. She would always hit me upside the back of the head and say, "Boy, you better say it the right way." Right. And I think it's funny now because, now I speak professionally, all over the country, and I'll actually be in Minnesota on Monday. I'll be in I believe I'm going to be at Eden Prairie School District in Minnesota.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So doing that is funny that I'm doing this now. My mother was big on communication, so it all plays out in some weird way. It all works out.
Yeah. Well, and having a strong parental figure in your life is incredibly important. And then your mother, being a strong woman of faith and, not letting you get away with, whether it be the talk and the slang or not being the best Chris that Chris could be, or it's so important. And, let's talk about forgiveness, Chris, because I know, like I said, I can't imagine going through what you went through back in June of 2015. I don't think most people, and thank God most people can't imagine that, and most people will never go through that. But when that happened, you found a way through it that I think a lot of people would find just completely foreign to their brains, being able to forgive. And I want you to talk about forgiveness, and I want you to talk about forgiveness as you understand it and as you do it, and what it took within you to forgive.
Absolutely, man. I'd love to. So, number one, it's hard for me to share forgiveness without my faith, because before I would have never imagined that I would forgive my mother's killer, right, for taking her away because she's Black. I would have said, "There's no way in the world, you're crazy. There's no way in the world that I'm gonna do that." And when I did it, it was something out of this world. I can't even take credit for it because sometimes things happen in our lives where it's like it's placed on us. I describe it as when you're driving home sometimes and you don't even realize what light was red or what stop sign you sometimes you're on autopilot. And I felt like I was on autopilot that day when I forgave my mother's killer. But I realized why. And the power of forgiveness, because Oftentimes when we talk about forgiveness, we think that it's weakness. We think we're doing it for the other person. But I've realized forgiveness is actually for you. It allows you to move forward. And I don't say move on because you don't move on from certain things, but you can move forward in your grieving process. You can move forward in trying to flip that tragedy to be your testimony, or the pain to be your purpose now. So I've moved forward in my life. Another thing that I realized why forgiveness is important. And if we don't do this, then we will never get there. So for me, in my mind, I keep saying, what's on the other side of forgiveness for you? Right. And in my case, I don't have to look at all young white men as being racist if I forgive my mother's killer. Right. And so when we talk about forgiveness, sometimes it's like a just word we loft out there. But true forgiveness for me means I'm going to say it out loud. I forgive Dylan Roof for murdering my mom on June 17, 2015. We say it out loud, and we say what is on the other side of it. For me, on the other side of it, I can be a great husband. I can be a great father. I won't constantly think about the way that my mother was murdered. So those are the things that's on the other side of forgiveness. Even as a believer, when we, the good book tells us to forgive and we will be forgiven. Like, I think about those things, like there's a reward for it. And if there's no reward for forgiving somebody, then what, as a human being, why would we do that? And so we have to think about what that reward is on the other side of forgiveness for us to move forward in our lives. And that's something that I champion because, a student asked me the other day, they asked, where's your mother's killer being held? And forgiveness for me means I didn't even know where he was being held at. I didn't know. I knew he got the death penalty, but that's all that I knew. I didn't know anything else. Mm-hmm. And forgiveness has freed me from needing an apology. He's never said sorry, but I don't need one with forgiveness. It's like reaching my hand out, and I feel good because I reached my hand out for them to shake. And if they don't shake it, hey, I did my part. And that's what forgiveness has done for me. And so hopefully that describes it practically, but also I had to share my faith in how I didn't expect that to happen at all.
No, that's an incredible explanation, Chris. And I love that because, I talk a lot, whether it be in my personal life or on this podcast or in my professional life, whatever. I talk a lot about, us not being able to control every aspect or everything that happens to us in our lives, but we have total control over how we react to it. And oftentimes that reaction is, most of the time, that reaction will fully determine how we move on with our lives. I think about things that have happened in my past, and certainly nothing that equates to what you're talking about, but the times that I've been done wrong in my life, and the things that I look at things that have happened to other people in my life, and we have to find a way to get to that other side, like you're talking about. Finding a way to move beyond it, because holding on to that animosity, like you could hold on to animosity and anger and just let that pain burn you up inside for the rest of your life. But how's that gonna benefit you? It's not. So I think it's so important what you talk about in that forgiveness being for you, that extending of that hand being the best way for you to get to the other side. And it really has no bearing on, you're not telling anybody it's okay that what happened, but that forgiveness is for you, not for anybody else. And it makes you the better person.
There's also two things that we forget sometimes when we talk about forgiveness. Like, there can be forgiveness and justice done at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. So in my case, I don't want to see my mother's killer walking on the streets whistling because he's never said sorry for what he's done. The closest thing he's ever said to sorry is, I don't know if I could do it again because people were so nice to me, is what he said. And so when I hear things like that, it's not that I want him to be walking on the streets and probably do that again. Absolutely not. I want justice to be served and make sure he's away from people that he won't be able to harm anybody else. But by forgiving him, I honestly think he one day does apologize. I hope one day he changes his thinking and stops the next Dylan Roof from doing something like that. So I think that we have to remember that justice and forgiveness can both be hand in hand. Another thing that I saw a quote that says, there's two of them. One of them says, Forgiveness is setting a prisoner free only to later realize that you yourself were the prisoner, which I thought was so powerful. And another quote that said, if you want to get revenge, that's awesome. Just make sure that you dig 2 graves while you're at it, right? Because you're not only going to get them, but you're wasting away your life trying to get revenge to the other person. So it's exactly what you mentioned.
Yeah. No, it's so true. I've talked to all kinds of people on this podcast. One of the things that I love best about doing this podcast, Chris, is I get to speak to a diverse range of people that have been through any number of different things. And I've talked to a couple former white supremacists on this podcast in a couple different episodes. I talked to Jeff Scoop back in episode 70, who's the former head of the American Neo-Nazis, National Socialist Party. And he has completely turned his life around and now works towards the de-radicalization of white supremacists because, he, after being in that movement for so many years, and then he started to work with a guy named Daryl Davis. I don't know if you're familiar with Daryl Davis or if you've heard of him, but just some things that happened in his life, and thankfully they did, because he brings a different perspective to the idea. And one of the things that he talks about, and he's talked at the Simon Wiesenthal Center about, he's spoken to people that have been involved in mass shootings and really got up close with the pain that causes and the damage that mindset of white supremacy does. And it makes me, it gives me hope that there are ways to get those people away from that before they become the next Dylan Roof. When you can take the mindset of that white supremacy and that just hateful mind and get it before it comes to fruition in a mass shooting in a church like it took your mom, or the school shootings that take place, or the mosque bombings. I've talked to. Well, he goes by Average Muhammad. He talks about de-radicalizing Muslim extremists. Before they take their hate to fruition and take their ideology and turn it into a hateful murder spree. Being able to change those minds, change the hearts and the minds of those that are filled with hate, and do it before go into a church and shoot up a church or a mosque or a school or whatever. I think it's very important what you're doing, Chris, because getting that mind, or getting to their minds, getting to their hearts and minds, and trying to change it before it happens is the right message. So talk about your love is stronger than hate, love over hate message. I know you talk all over the country. You're doing incredible work. Talk about that message. Talk about what you're doing and what you talk to these big, whether it be a big corporation or a school classroom in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. What is Chris Singleton's message, and how are you getting it across? How are you getting to those hearts and minds?
Yeah, man. Well, it's twofold. Number one, I'll say, when we talk about love is stronger than hate, I think for me, when we have different points of view, when we have different opinions, if I want to change your mind, I gotta love you. And by doing that, I want to place a blanket of information. I want to place a blanket of my story on you. I don't want to throw a brick of this or a brick of that, right? Even though when we think different than someone, we want to tell them exactly where they're wrong or why they're wrong. Like, we want to just hit them with all these things, and people are dodging that, right? Unfortunately. So when we talk about love being stronger than hate, if I want to change your heart, I have to love you. Unfortunately, you're not, even if I'm right and I'm doing the right thing, if I'm not doing it in a way where you feel safe, you're going to dodge all that stuff. For me, my biggest message when I share with organizations, with schools, with anybody, I could say there's two. As I've done it, I've just starts to keep evolving. But number one, I remind people, like you mentioned earlier, that nobody chooses their skin color, right? Nobody chooses their first language. Nobody chooses where they're born, who they're born to. And so I would never hate somebody for those things, and they should never hate me for them just as well, because none of us chose them. At the core of who we are, we didn't choose it. And so that's my number one message. But also, man, when we meet somebody and we get a little older and we see them and we start to judge them, I want us to remember that behind every stance, there's a story. And so if somebody just comes out with their stance and it's not like it's not something you agree with, you're going to immediately turn your ears off. You don't want to listen anymore. But if we keep thinking about them and their stories before their stances, there's empathy there. You know, the example that I give a lot of times is that I lost my mom and she was shot multiple times while she was praying. And that's my story, right? So my stance is that I personally don't like guns because I lost my mom in a terrible way that involved gun violence, right? Mm-hmm. And so people can understand why I personally don't like them because of my story. But if I were to just come out and tell somebody, hey, I don't like guns, they probably would stop listening immediately because if they're a person that supports them. And on the flip side, if a person grew up and they went hunting or they went shooting with their grandfather all the time and they tell me that story and they follow that up with telling me how they love guns, guess what? I understand just as well. But the problem that we face is that in our day and age, we hear somebody's stance and we stop listening. We don't care about their story. And I think if we were to listen more to somebody's story before or after hearing their stance, I think there's a lot more good that we can do in the world.
No doubt about it, Chris. No doubt about it. And actually, it's funny that you bring that up in that way because, you know, I've had conversations. Like I said, I've had conversations with people that run the gambit on this podcast. And one of the most common things that I talk about with people who would like to get their point across to people of differing mindsets is just that, finding the humanity in those people you disagree with. Being able to find that humanity so that you actually do listen and do understand. You know, I had a conversation with a gentleman named Angel Eduardo a while back, and he talks about star manning and steel manning, and had a really fascinating mindset when it came to the concept of race. He's a person of color, and he just, that whole thing of getting past those things that make us different and just finding the humanity in the other person so that we're not arguing with a monster or we're not making a monster out of those that we disagree with, and being able to really articulate the other side's position. You know, I've got an upcoming project that I'm working on in conjunction with the Derate the Hate podcast and Braver Angels. It's another organization that I participate in events and do some work with that tries to basically help people with a better and more positive discourse, you know, in their conversations. People of differing mindsets, mostly political, and I'm going to be working on a project, kind of a roundtable of sorts, where we get together, we talk about an issue. I'll have a group of people on one side of an issue, a group of people on another side of an issue. They'll talk about, and actually our first concept or the first episode is going to be about guns. So it's very fascinating that you brought that up. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. But we'll have somebody on pro Second Amendment side, a group, and a group on the, you know, pro more gun control side. And they'll each speak their point, but then they'll have to also articulate that they fully understand the humanity behind the other's position. So just like you and I are talking here, I grew up around guns. I've got multiple guns. I've been around guns my whole life. You know, I grew up with them. I've been hunting since I was a little tiny kid. I love to shoot for sport. I shoot for hunting. I collect guns just because I like guns. But I totally understand Chris Singleton's side of the issue. You know, I can see that because the humanity in Chris Singleton is what I see, and you're more than just a anti-gun stance. You've got a lot of reason for feeling the way that you feel, and that doesn't make you who you are. That doesn't completely define you, just like your skin color doesn't define Chris Singleton. You know, the fact that you're anti-gun doesn't define Chris Singleton. You as a human being and all the love that you put out there defines Chris Singleton.
Absolutely, man. I couldn't have said it any better. You see, when we talk as human beings and we talk about things that we've gone through, when, you know, you talk about growing up and hunting and stuff like that. If I would have grown up hunting, it would have been normal for me to see a gun. And I've never been that way for me. It's always been, unfortunately just thinking about my mom. But you understand somebody else's side of the story or their side of the stands when, you hear that story, which I think is a beautiful thing that more people need to do. And so kudos to you for the panel that you're about to put on, man. I think there's going to be some good stuff that comes from that, man. There's going to be a lot of understanding. Sometimes, unfortunately, we listen to tell somebody where they're wrong. We listen to, immediately say, oh, well, that's where I got you, instead of listening just to understand where that person is coming from, right? I want to, I give the example sometimes of if somebody comes to you and says that 2 + 2 is 5, and that 2 + 2 is 4, instead of being the person that says, you know what, I'm done listening because you're wrong, whatever, I know it's 4, I've always been taught it's 4. What if we said, let me just see how in the world they even got to 5, because I want to figure that one out. The next person that comes along, they might be saying, hey, 2 + 2 is 5. And you can say, you know what? I bet I know why you're thinking that. And now I can teach you in this moment. Instead of saying, oh, 2 + 2 is 4, and I'm not thinking about this person ever again. There's somebody else that you may be able to persuade by just learning from them or listening to them. And so that's something I'm doing. It's something I see that you're doing, man. So I'm glad that I'm on this podcast. I'm glad you're doing the work that you're doing, brother.
Yeah, man, it's so incredibly important what you're doing. I think people like you and I that are just out there trying to put out that message, trying to spread love and humanity, as opposed to, there's always going to be things, Chris, that we disagree about. It's just nature. It's just human nature. But
it's beautiful though. We don't want everybody to look the same and do the same thing. That's boring, and that's not a world we want to live in, right?
No, that's I think about the cancel culture and the different things that are going on now, and people shouting down people of different mindsets and not even allowing them to speak, and rather than finding the humanity in people with different opinions, that they would rather shut them up and not listen. And we have to use love. We have to use understanding. We have to seek clarity more than agreement. You and I don't have to agree on anything. We can try to make sure that I'm clear about how you come to your mindset, and you're clear about how I come to my mindset. And whether we agree or not, we can see the humanity in each other, and we're brothers. It's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely, man.
So
I'll give you this
important.
example. I'll give you an example. My one of my best friends. I got 2 best friends in the world, right? One of my best friends, he always carries a gun everywhere he goes, right? And he knows how I feel about him. So you know what he does? He just never pulls it out. He never does anything to where I can see it in front of him, and he's one of my best friends. I know he's got a gun. He always carries one with him, right? He's got his concealed weapons permit. And so he carries it wherever he goes. But he understands my feelings. He understands how I am about it. So he doesn't, he just makes me feel safe, right? He feels safe because he's always carrying his gun, but he makes me feel safe because I don't see it. He just keeps it to where, I would never know if I didn't know him,
Right.
So
right.
things like that. It's just little things that we can do to make sure that one another, we're looking out for one another, right? And I would never ask him to not bring his gun around because I know that's what makes him feel safe.
Yeah.
So that's just how we've learned how to help one another, even though we think differently, like you're saying.
Right. No, and to take that to the next level, it's beautiful that while it's not something that you're comfortable with and you understand him and why he does what he does, and it doesn't have to be a topic of conversation. It doesn't have to be in the forefront of your relationship. It doesn't even have to be known or talked about. It can just be one of those silent things in our background. All of my friends, there's stuff that my friends do at home or whether it be on their jobs or with their wives or whatever the case may be. I don't need to know every aspect about them. I just, it's one of those things that it goes without saying. It doesn't have to be the focus of our relationship. And I think a lot of people need to start realizing that, whether it be politics or, divisive subjects like whether it be guns or any number, they try to turn everything into a divisive subject nowadays.
Yeah.
But the great thing about it is those don't have to be the focal point of your and my relationship. If you and I were walking down the street together, Why should we focus on those things with which we don't agree? Let's focus on the things that we do agree upon and just be friends, man. I would imagine that you and I would have a lot more in common than those things that we don't have in common.
Absolutely.
And why focus each day, or why focus on the time that we have together on this earth on those things which we disagree versus all the things that I'm sure we agree upon? So, I love your message, Chris, and I appreciate what you're doing. It's so important, and keep it up, man. It's so awesome. Is there anything that you want to leave the DTH listeners with? Any call to action? Anything you got coming up? I know. By the time this airs, you'll have already been in Eden Prairie, but we got listeners all around the world. So, what do you got coming up? What do you want people to do? How do they get in touch with you? And how do they get part of this Love is Greater Than Hate message?
Yeah, man. So I'd say, my social medias, all of my social medias, I think, are verified. So if you want to hit me up on there, follow my journey, it's Chris Singleton or C Singleton _2. Another thing that I have coming up is I write children's books. It's one of my passions, man. So next year I've got my third children's book coming out called Baseball Around the World. I'm a baseball guy, right? Got drafted by the Cubs, played a little bit in the minors, but I love the sport. And so just teaching about the different cultures that are playing the game, got that coming out. So I'd love people to support that. But more than anything, man, when you see somebody or you hear somebody that thinks different than you, don't automatically write them off. Remember that they got a story behind their stance just like you do behind yours.
Awesome. I love your message. Keep it up, Chris. So important. Keep on derating that hate and keep doing what you do. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the opportunity, brother.
Friends, I just want to say again how very, very grateful that I am that you took the time to join me for another Derate the Hate podcast episode. Please share us with your friends, share us with your network. If you haven't done so already, subscribe and talk your friends into doing the same. Feedback and ratings, wherever you get your audio, always greatly appreciated. And with that, I will just say get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. Friends, if there was anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, I would love to hear about it. Email me, wilk@wilksworld.com, or hit me up on most social media platforms. With that, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.